I began now, at the time of this presentation, I began 4 years ago or so studying Cubism in painting. I came to Cubism in painting from studies of literary Cubism, its form in literature, from writers like William Carlos Williams, Gertrude Stein, the photography of Alfred Stieglitz and the 291 gallery. Once I became interested in Cubism, I studied the discourse in art history that revolves around Cubist art. I studied Cubist aesthetic theories, Cubist techniques, different kinds of Cubism, the writings from starting in 1910, 1911, du Cubisme, Apollinaire's writings, John Golding in the 60s with his anecdotal history of Cubism, or is that Jerry? Anyways, I studied almost 100 years of writings on Cubism and found many inconsistencies. Then I studied art history itself as a mode of writing. I found inconsistencies built into it and even read books where they describe these problems implicit in art history and the telling of art histories. I had a good look at Primitivism, European Primitivism in art aside. Primitivism acting presently at the Museum of the Fine Arts of Montreal, aside there. And then I came to Picasso's Demoiselles d'Avignon, which was hailed as one of the greatest works of modern art, that all works after it in the 20th century owed something to that painting, which I did not necessarily agree with because I found that the painting was slightly boring. But my opinion is not the object of this investigation. I started noticing that there was a reason why I was doing this. There was something about Picasso and that painting that made me not only desire, but it was an absolute need for me to go on. I said, I'm not gonna be able to live if I don't write a book on this. And so I studied the discourse in art history, the art historical discourse, which revolves around the Demoiselles d'Avignon. Very few paintings have had so much written about them. And in that discourse, quasi-discourse, pseudo-discourse particularly, I noticed that what was being forgotten was the actual materiality of the painting. And insofar as a painting is not a living thing, this insouciance is not so bad. But what happens is that it can so easily move on to living things, which I saw with my work with Lana on prostitution and a case that had been going on where obviously someone had not respected some normative laws of human conduct by killing innocent people. So I studied law, Canadian criminal law, and the Civil Code of Quebec, and I got a feel for the type of writing that it was. And then I moved towards aesthetic laws and seeing what happens when those are transgressed. And I came upon Iconoclasm from in the early Renaissance period, where paintings were torn down from church walls and the walls were painted over, defaced, and how this had to do with the new Protestant ideology. After which I realized that the image is always veiled, that there was reason behind the Demoiselle as object, as physical thing, how it was veiled. And it has to do with the historical consciousness of Picasso himself, or of many people at that time, studying, working very, very hard, doing their best. You can only imagine that artists in the early 20th century were doing their best. They weren't fuck-alls. And so I wanted to know more about why I chose, because I did choose to study all of these things. This path was not random. I made decisions, careful decisions. Every time I read a new book, I made sure that it was what I needed. And so I didn't make it to the first conference, and this conference I wanted to be here to talk a little bit about the history, my history, and why I want to study this painting. And it so happens that in studying Montreal history of Montreal, I noticed that Protestantism and Catholicism, their little dispute, had a lot to do with it all. The Refus Global in 1960 or 1959 is proof of a global refute that seemed to have been needed by artists in Quebec, in Montreal particularly, and some of our greatest artists were exiled unwillingly to parts of France where they could speak French. And so really what it boils down to is that Montreal is a place like any other place. It is an elsewhere. And if Cubism and Les Demoiselles d'Avignon were attractive to me as objects of study, I can only blame myself, my art history, and the art of others. And who do I have to thank but an audience that was eager to listen? Thank you. Much of the focus in the discourse which deals with Demoiselles d'Avignon, much of the focus is on the preparatory sketches. Now it has been said last year or so, a writer wrote a book on the Demoiselles d'Avignon. And his contention about this focus on the preparatory sketches had to do with what we were forgetting, the actual painting. Now it's good to look at preparatory sketches, 400 or so sketches, but then do they really have anything to do with the painting? Could the painter have not been amusing himself with little drawings of no significance really to him except that they were passing the time? That's just a hypothesis. But really, if we're saying that this painting is phenomenal, it's one of the greatest works of all time, the most talked about, well then, we're doing several disservices here. For, as theorists, we like to play around with ideas of art and life, how they intertwine, how art can represent nature, but can it really, and how life imitates art, and theatrics of daily life, the dynamic of interpersonal relationships, and how we all resemble Shakespeare's writings a little bit. But when it comes down to it, there are real artists. And by that I mean people that practice arts, and that have careers, or that are working towards a career. And now, myself being an artist, a painter, I also compose music and write poetry. I cannot sit around. No. As a painter, firstly, I don't feel that I have the luxury to speculate too much on the relation between art and life, because I have art to produce and a life to live. I cannot afford to forget about life, for I am living, and insofar as I am currently engaged as a painter, professionally, I ought not to forget my painting, or it will steal away a little bit at a time from life. If I want to succeed in the end in painting, I will have to sacrifice a little bit of my life to it, as I have done previously. If I want to succeed in life, I cannot let my painting, take the upper hand. And so, to the extent that I studied the paintings of others, and so to the extent that I studied the paintings of others, I could not let it steal too much time away from my own painting, and also from my own life. But, as a living being and a student and a painter, I sacrificed some time to painting and to studying the paintings of others, and realized a great difficulty. Whenever I thought I was making real progress in studying Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, Picasso's paintings, other paintings, Cubism, Constructivism, Surrealism, Bauhaus, I would get terribly confused. I would find inconsistencies constantly, everywhere. And I realized that this everywhere all the time was a generalization on my part, insofar as I could not escape my life as an artist. And those lives of those who were artists before me, having passed on a tradition, I could not offend their standards of excellence, and I could only defend the integrity of their art. But in the end, to have a little dignity left over for myself, I had to cut every time that I came to really understanding clearly something such as Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, a painting by another artist, when I came too close to it, I cut myself from it and distanced myself. But it was art. It was a material thing. I had to first realize that the painting was a lifeless object with some value, and that there was an important differentiation to make between a lifeless object such as a painting and, say, a clan, a group of people, a nation, history with a capital H, civilization. I found that I could not spend too much time making decisions and planning out a speech on Les Demoiselles d'Avignon when there were real life situations that I had to attend to, real animals to take care of at home, relationships with living souls. And so distance from the object of art history was necessary and did not have too many negative consequences, so long as I did not distance myself too much from those things that were necessary for art and life, the part that I played in either of those concepts. What I found most difficult was to know when and when not to speak of something that I had learned in, say, art history, or something I had learned in painting. For were I to divulge something of a secret that I discovered in painting, and that was something that when I was younger and I played a lot of guitar, I used to always wonder, and jazz musicians would say that there were trade secrets that they couldn't trade to an apprentice. Well, in art history and in painting as practices, both of which I am trying to keep learning, there was necessarily a certain status that one needed to attain in order to speak on a certain object. I am not here to judge the status of people before me who have spoken on some of the things that I have spoken about today. But what I can do is study closely my relation to the discourses in which I delve in and out of as an interdisciplinary artist, practitioner, and find something worthwhile. For if something that I had to say, speak out about, was worthwhile, then there would be little doubt that I had the status to announce it. I can read Deleuze and Kierkegaard, but I cannot speak in public of their philosophies. I would do them an injustice at this rate. And yet slowing down and thinking up of what I could speak about, which would be of value to such a wide-ranging audience as this, I found that I could speak of my life as a painter over the last year. This last year for me as a painter has been very difficult. I have been working on a project of self-portraiture. I decided that I would make self-portraits, not of myself at first, but self-portraits, but portraits, and that the easiest portrait to paint would be myself, but it turned out to be one of the most difficult. I had to be authentic, genuine. I couldn't just scribble any old thing and tell someone it was my face, when my face was right there for them to judge for themselves. I couldn't really change my face. So I worked on self-portraits every day. I worked on other things too, other paintings and drawings, but there were a series that were self-portraits. I tried to learn about the proportions of the human face and of emotions that could be projected with the face. I kept a diary of my work on self-portraits, and so in this very difficult project I began sort of work on identity. I had an essay on habit and having and identity and possession, which was published on the net, an attempt at philosophy. And as my own identity changed, I saw the identity of a nation wanting to find an identity for itself, namely Canada. Oh, but I come from a little old province. We've had an identity for many, many years. And Canada has an identity and it is very aware of it. But nationalism is not necessary at all times. And yet, as a painter, I wanted to paint for Canada, for a constitutional monarchy. I made a painting of the Queen. Our Queen. I dreamt of writing letters to the Queen, but knew that things were ordered so that if by any chance I wanted something, if by any chance I wanted the Queen's attention for something, I could do it as a painter and not as a letter writer. And if I wanted to write letters, well, there's all sorts of borough offices I could write letters to all over the damn place. But insofar as I understood my country politically, economically, legally, aesthetically, artistically, as a painter, I had only one thing that I could do, which was paint what the public wanted. I could try and try and try again to counteract this fact, this truth. But in the end, if I wanted to live a life and be a painter, I would have to sacrifice all my painterly visions and craft that did not go according to the public and the public virtues. And so, is there anything, after all this, that I have to impart to an audience of scholars? The answer is yes. Studying is one thing. Presenting studies is another. If you are going to present something from studies still underway, if you are to present it as a student, then be sure to present only that which has been well thought out and well rehearsed, and to keep your work as student, as one endeavoring into learning a discipline. Keep your disciplines and practices separate from your life. Respect life and others who endeavor in these same disciplines. And if you feel the need to present something of yourself, of your life, your history, personal, then if you think that it will be worthwhile, you are at liberty to express or present anything whatsoever from your own experience as a living being. For whether speech is a gift or it is something learned, as of a trade, if you think it worthwhile to such an audience to speak out as I have now done, as a person, then do so, but differentiate carefully and redirect your attention time and time again to what preserves life, different from what preserves trade, and different lives and trades, arts, different schools, can discuss diplomatically and observe mutual endeavors. As a final note, I would like to say, as a painter this time, that I have myself painted some reproductions of Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. As a scholar, independent scholar, I have studied the discourse around this painting. I have, as a person, found connections to my own life, my own upbringing, my own history, and histories that are not mine. And so in closing I say that painting is no easy task, that it is not for everyone, and that should you decide to take on painting as a practice for your life, be sure to respect the integrity of others endeavoring in that same field, without ever taking anything away from your own dignity that you take in the work that you do at present or in the past. But do not be afraid to undertake projects which seem impossible, if they are of a nature that you trust and would like to see in yourself repeated. For as a painter, the time I took away from life to be a student of Cubism, and Picasso's Demoiselles, which came before Cubism, I was a total irritable ass. And though I had clinical reasons I never needed to be critical about my illness. That is, hey, one can still live one more year of life, as I have, and I thought it impossible. One can still paint one more year of life, as I have, and thought it difficult. And to put an end to this, study those things which you love best. Studies are often confusing, and do not shy away from what you deem the worst in yourself. But beware of finding the worst in others. For without the worst of others, what would I do best? Thank you.